Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe, and thank you very much for joining us today. Compostable products and packaging could contribute to cleaning up the world, or when they're made irresponsibly using PFAS, compostable products could pollute the soil with these forever chemicals, the PFAS that are linked to the loss of fertility in women, developmental delays in children, and various cancers. Today, we welcome back Erin Levine, Resource Recovery Manager at Centric, who last joined us in November to discuss municipal and state-level composting progress in California. Centric makes PFAS-free certified compostable food service and packaging products. And Erin's East Coast-based recovery program colleague, Elly, who recently joined the company, also will be in the conversation today. Since we last talked, composting progress has been mixed. For example, California continues to expand its composting capacity to enable curbside pickup of food waste and compostable packaging across the state. On the other hand, Colorado recently limited what can be sent for composting in the state to just food waste. Compostable packaging will not be processed. Making packaging sustainable, whether that means it can be recycled conveniently or composted to return the material to nature without pollutants, is essential to reducing the 292 million tons of solid waste created annually in the United States as of 2018. Only 32% of that waste was recycled or composted. Packaging makers can help by designing products for recyclability and compostability, as well as by labeling products clearly to help customers find responsible ways to dispose of them. Composting is changing fast, so let's talk about the latest developments. You can learn more about Centric at worldcentric.com. Centric is all one word, no space, no dash, worldcentric.com. Welcome to the show, Erin and Elly. How are you both doing today? And by the way, Elly, could you begin because you're the new voice? Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Elly Ventura. I'm the Resource Recovery Manager in the East with Centric. I just joined them in February, and I'm really happy to represent the East and learn more about Centric and help share the really great work that we're doing.
And Erin, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Mitch. I'm happy to be back and talking to you, and happy to be joined by Elly today as well.
Well, it's great to have you both. Let me start off by asking about the latest on California's implementation of SB 1383, which is called the Short-Lived Climate Pollutant Reduction Strategy Act, which is the long way of saying the state composting program. How's it going in the state, Erin?
Well, as we've spoken about, Mitch, it's been SB 1383 has been really slow. It's been a slow roll. It's been hard to implement. And more communities have implemented composting services. And there have been 2 additional facilities added in California this last year, permitted for mixed organics. However, we're still left with inadequate capacity at all of our permitted facilities to handle the amount of organics. Mm-hmm. And frankly, we're not even close to 75%. There's anecdotal evidence that we show we're only about 10% or less towards the goal. But CalRecycle is conducting a waste characterization, and they're hoping to determine a benchmark. And what they do is they try to get a representative sample of landfilled materials and sort it to determine how much organic material is still being trashed. So we're a long ways away, and we really do need to increase our facilities. We need, but the main issue there is with permitting. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of challenges that entities are facing related to the working with the air board, the water board, local enforcement agencies. There's just a lot of challenges. It takes many years oftentimes to permit these. So that is the main challenge.
Bureaucracy and funding, the curses of our modern times. Elly, I'm curious, you're working on the East Coast, and we tend to think of the East Coast as being a little behind the West on a lot of this stuff, but I don't think that's actually the case. Tell us what's going on back there.
Yeah, so I spent a long time, over a decade, working in the state of Vermont in materials management, and was there when their universal recycling and composting law started in 2012, and then was there through the pandemic as well. So, funding is certainly an issue. Permitting is definitely an issue as well. But when the universal recycling and composting law was phasing in Vermont, we actually kind of saw an uptick in small haulers and new business development as that was coming into play, because the final phase of that was July 1st, 2020. And 2020 was the year everything, in case people forgot, the year everything stopped, right? But we did see an uptick in those new businesses because of the policy that mandated organics no longer be disposed of in the landfill. So the direct connection between taxes and infrastructure and funding those smaller businesses related to organics isn't necessarily a straight line. But there are some state programs that come out regularly in Vermont to help expand both infrastructure and collection of organics. There's a program in Colorado right now that is doing the same thing. So it's really great to see some of the states being active and recognizing locally that they need to bolster the infrastructure to manage organics. And then there is a composter in the Midwest who just received a $2 million USDA grant to expand facilities in his operation. And then back to permitting, we just talked with a composter in Colorado yesterday who worked 2 years to get her permit approved just very recently, like last week. So they're now the 16th permitted Class 3 composting facility in Colorado. So that's the first new one to be permitted there in about 5 or 6 years. So there's a whole host of influences on the expansion of infrastructure for us as a country. Erin and I are fortunate that we get to help people identify where they can expand, help them learn about funding opportunities, and really get to understand better what their business operations are so that we can all work together to really manage organics in a responsible way to help really make an impact positively on our current climate status.
You know, I spent part of yesterday, the day before we're recording, talking on the EPA's draft national strategy to prevent plastic pollution briefing call. And they're calling for, and this is a quote, more effective composting and degradation of certified compostable products, as well as reviews of certification and in infrastructure investment programs. Does World Centric, in the various conversations you have, see a growing dialogue about funding for a national composting infrastructure? Are we, in all of that kind of grinding into gear that you're describing in various states, is there a movement towards a national strategy?
Definitely. And there are a lot of big and small organizations who are looking to influence policy at a number of different levels. The first one that comes to mind is the U.S. Composting Council, who has a really strong voice in advocating for the Compost Act, which may end up becoming part of the Farm Bill. And we're really excited and feeling pretty positive about it as being one of the really first big, influential, and powerful bills that will finally bring compost into the forefront of the conversation, to really escalate it and bring it up to the same conversation as we talk about pesticides and fertilizers and non-organic inputs. So I think there's a lot of really great energy around that. And it's kind of a bottom-up strategy to be able to get it to this federal level.
So, Erin, California is a big and diverse state with some of the biggest cities, but also a lot of rural areas. Do you see different regions doing a better job or getting better support for this? For instance, because there's more farms nearby that can use the compost. Is there a connection between the geography and the economy and this funding?
Rural areas have been slower to implement. I mean, it's more composting in the Bay Area is just a common practice. We've had it for many, many years. And I think the more the focus and energy is that in Southern California, where there's a really dense population and a complete lack of infrastructure and programs. They've seen a lot of barriers, which include the fact that rates aren't bundled, so people aren't getting charged more for one type of service over another. There's been haulers that have just dropped off these bins after 1383 started without any outreach, any education, nothing about to educate people on contamination. So there's just been this lack of awareness generally. So routing takes time in bigger cities. And so onboarding strategies needs to be thought about, since you can't onboard an existing client all at once. And you have to do it right with outreach, training, education, engagement, like I said. And additionally, so property managers aren't really getting on board either. So we've had this issue that they're not communicating the importance of composting. And when we have these perceived barriers that are still existing, so we have the ick factor, for example. People think it will attract rodents. They think that just by discarding their food scraps in the bin next to the one they've been discarding it in, it will suddenly bring additional problems. So there are a lot of challenges involved.
So it's interesting. I mean, we're talking about a circular economy in these organic materials that goes from the city, or actually from the farm to the city, and then we have to get it back. And there's a lot of disconnects in that process. Now, in particular, we're talking about compostable packaging. And you all did some research and found that 13% of U.S. composting programs accept products, packaging and tableware, for instance. Green Blue, another organization, found a slightly higher level, 15%. Is there good evidence that mixed compostables, including fiber and bioplastics, for instance, can be processed successfully and produce a compost that's good for farms?
Absolutely. I'll start with talking about the CMA, which is the Compost Manufacturers Alliance. They've been field testing compostable products for the last 5 years and have found that many successful trials specifically relating to bioplastics, in particular PLA. They're even considering using PLA now as a control because they've seen so much evidence that PLA can disintegrate in an appropriate time frame. So there are several studies underway right now to continue proving this. So we need all this data and research, but to call out specifically the Compost and Research Education Foundation, they've been doing a lot of work around field studies. So there are the ASTM standards that exist that people can do it in a lab, but more composters want to authenticate it and to actually have evidence in field that it will break down in the time frame they desire. So we've been participating with studies with CREF again, and then there's also a big study underway with closed loop partners. There's the degradation study. So they have several facilities on board, these large industrial compost facilities that are testing compostable products. So that research will be coming out again later this year. So we'll look to that there's so much evidence already that exists that these actually work. My mind, what the biggest barrier is for composters is that they can't properly identify what's compostable and what's not. So when they welcome it, they welcome other potential contaminants like conventional plastics or other might be recyclable packaging. They welcome that and they see the higher level and higher volume of contamination.
So help us understand the difference between compostable, a product that breaks down completely in 180 days in an industrial pile, versus a biodegradable product that may take decades to break down. Why does that distinction matter?
It matters because biodegradable just means that it will actually break down, but doesn't give any specific time frame related to it. So biodegradable means that it will degrade with the assistance of microbes, and it will convert into CO2, organic matter, water, but it will not give any specific time frame, nor does it mean that it's tested for ecotoxicity. So the big difference with the word compostable means that it's tied to a very specific time frame that it will disintegrate and fully biodegrade. So those are two different things, but there is a link there. Biodegrade is just it could take 500 plus years. It doesn't mean anything, and it's not regulated by the FTC, whereas compostable is a regulated term.
So how can consumers tell the difference when they're making a purchase decision?
Well, look for the call out of the word compostable, because if you claim that and you're a food packaging company, it's meaningful. That means that you've done your due diligence in testing or field testing, lab testing or field testing to prove that your product can break down in the time frame desired. Further, there's some green guides. So the FTC green guides, which will call out the fact that you have to say if it's commercially compostable.
That's the important point. You can't necessarily put a compostable product in your home pile. It does, in many cases, need to be industrially composted. Do you see a move towards being clearer about that particular aspect of the compostable labeling?
Well, currently there's no ASTM standards that exist for home compostability. So in the US,
There is in Europe, though.
There are European standards too. TUV has the home compostability standards. So our bags, for example, are certified for home composting, but that's certified for a whole year. So it just takes a really long time. The difference, so if BPI, which is the Biodegradable Products Institute, along with ASTM, are looking into standards that it would comply for home compostability. But systems are so highly variable that it's a really big challenge to identify. Whereas a commercial compost facility is prescribed, it's meticulously managed, they have to achieve high heat, they have a full-time staff that are dedicated to making these piles become a soil amendment in a certain time frame. So there's just a home compostability, there's such high variability that it's such a challenge. But again, if you see the compostable label, that does mean that it's tested though for ecotoxicity. So it's not unsafe for your home compost pile. We just can't, as a company, certify it and say, yes, it will break down in a certain time frame. But it's not that it's unsafe. So I always tell people it's acceptable because we've had it tested. We know there's no heavy metals. We know there's nothing that's pathogenic in it that will actually harm your compost.
And it's such an important point because it doesn't mean you're going to pollute if you do compost it. I want to take a quick commercial break and come back and talk more about the materials because there's a lot of ins and outs to this conversation. We'll be right back. And now back to the discussion with Erin Levine and Elly Ventura. They are resource recovery managers at Centric, a Roanoke Park, California-based maker of certified compostable food service and packaging products. Now, Centric has embraced PLA, polylactic acid. It's a bioplastic, and you use it as a liner for takeout containers and cups. It breaks down into completely organic material that can be used in gardens and farming when industrially composted. But there are other emerging materials out there, PHA and others, for instance, that are being considered. Are you exploring ways to change the liners you're using? Tell us about, I know you tried a couple of different materials. Why did you settle on PLA?
There's a number of reasons. I think PLA is one of kind of the most proven bioplastics that are out there. It's dependable, it's readily available. And then we also look at things, we want our compostables to be accessible to everyone. So price point is something that's important to us as well. So it is one of the more affordable bioplastics that's being made right now too. So that's important to us. And we've also, the other thing that we really value is performance. We're making a quality product and we want it to perform and meet expectations. And we've had that experience with PLA as well. So while we have tried some others, we're fortunate to have an internal team to be responsive to consumer feedback. So if we do pilot something or try something new, we can pivot and make corrections or changes quickly if we're seeing dissatisfaction with how those are performing. So we have come back to PLA.
Now, you raised price as a reason for making that decision. There are other companies out there that make various forms of fiber-based packaging using PFAS, which are the forever chemicals that are proven to be bad for us, that cause cancer. Is it actually more expensive to use PLA instead of PFAS? And how do you apply these materials in the process? What's the difference?
The PFAS formulation, which is being voluntarily phased out under the FDA by the end of this year, is usually a liquid component that goes into the slurry of the fiber before it's molded into the shape of the container. So it's included in that recipe. Some, including us, some manufacturers have strayed away from that with the PFAS bans that are rolling out across the country, East and West Coast primarily. So instead of including that liquid formulation into the slurry, the shape of the container is made, and then a PLA film is almost like ironed on top of it to provide that grease and moisture barrier resistance. So from a manufacturing perspective, that's an extra step, right? You have to form the shape, and then you have to iron on the PLA film. So from an expense point, just in the building of the container from a one-step mold with the slurry to an application of a film post shape, that can increase costs.
Now, the interesting thing about cost is we're talking about that in terms of the profitability of a company, but the cost for the consumer, if they pay less for a PFAS infected product today, let's use that word, they might be paying substantially more for medical care in the future. And I was at the Organic Trade Association meeting this past week, and we were talking about a number of times the fact that overall, if you take the amount we spend on food and health over the past 50 years, it's the same in aggregate, but that the distribution of spend has changed radically. We pay less for food and products, but we pay a lot more for medical care. And that is projectable from the fact that we're eating both crappy food and from crappy products, in many cases, or packaging. How do you see the industry rethinking its responsibility to provide a healthy product to people? Is that something that's going on?
I mean, we can speak for World Centric. It is. I mean, we've voluntarily phased out our PFAS line. So not just doing laminate, we've also developed a proprietary solution as an alternative to PFAS. So it will act like an oil and grease barrier, but it's completely plant-based. So we have voluntarily decided that even though these bans are in place in certain states, that we would take it out completely of our products, all of the molded fiber items. So we are highly concerned. It is a priority item for us this year. And it took 6 years in development to actually come out with this solution. So you can tell by the investment, and we've made an innovation that it's a high. We're very committed to the health and safety. I mean, I can't speak for the industry as a whole because yes, it might be a cheaper fill, but hopefully as it gets more widely recognized, like you alluded to, with the health concerns and related to, especially something that comes in contact with food that we're ingesting. It's so just a direct connection that I'm really hoping more companies come on board.
Yeah, the idea that somebody would microwave something in a PFAS container, which essentially would move the PFAS from the material into the food, is frightening. I also heard that you're working on reusable options. Are these products still fiber-based, and do you have a sense of how many times you can use them and whether or not they can be recycled or composted in life? Can you tell us anything at this point?
We're really excited. Actually, this year we're going to be launching our reusable line called Zero Wear. And our Zero Wear is made of PLA. It's a thicker PLA, so it can be reused. We're in process of getting a dishwasher test to determine how many actual uses that would be. So we're really excited to bring this to market as an option, an alternative to a single-use item. And
so it's still fiber-based, but you could potentially wash it in the dishwasher.
It's pure PLA.
Pure PLA. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
Yeah, a thicker PLA. So yeah.
Okay. Now, the idea of reuse also implies something that will have an end of life. Will this be recyclable or compostable when you're done with it?
Yes, we're looking into doing a take-back program for the PLA, so we can actually get it. There's specialized recyclers that will handle PLA to pelletize the PLA. We're hoping that we can team up with a recycler, keep it in circulation.
Now, you also have the no-tree packaging, which is made from bagasse and bamboo, bagasse being from sugarcane fiber. How much CO2 and trees avoided, tree destruction or deforestation have you avoided with that product line to date? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't think we've had a sense exactly of that, but I think we are launching a line of bamboo cutlery this year, and we actually can claim carbon negative on the bamboo cutlery. We've had our sustainability analyst look into raw materials, and there's a number of reasons why we can claim the carbon negative. And it has to do with the fact that bamboo sequesters carbon as it grows. We source from FSC certified sources for the bamboo, and the proximity of the farm to factory. So it's less than 100 miles, so that it contributes. And then our factory actually runs on solar. So with all those factors combined, our sustainability analyst has determined that we are actually producing a carbon negative product, which is our bamboo cutlery line. So we have fork, knife, spoon, complete 100% bamboo.
Now, we're going to go back to the infrastructure for a moment here, because Colorado recently decided to limit its composting program to only food waste. And what you just described is a wonderful outcome for a product, but they wouldn't take it. How can we get those programs to start to recognize that they could be composting sustainable materials more effectively than we do today? I mean, what do we need to do to break through and get composting to be a universal practice rather than a very highly selective and often conflicting practice from place to place?
If I had that answer, Mitch, I would be retired by now. We've been working. That's another thing that Erin and I do for World Centric, is try to get those answers to that question. And it is challenging, but I think, when Colorado made that announcement, it was headline making and behavior changing. Fortunately, their announcement is that they're pausing right now, not totally stopping, but they're pausing in order to re-educate the public. So this happened in Vermont years ago, too. The biggest composter in the state of Vermont made the same announcement. They gave people 1 year lead time to adjust. In January 1st of 2022, they stopped accepting certified compostable packaging. So there's if you think about how these materials are used and think about the number of hands that they go through before we're finished with them and designate them as waste, there's a lot of weak links along that chain. So
are there levers to get the composting companies to recognize the benefit of taking the additional materials?
Yeah, and I think that is a kind of conundrum that we deal with, because most composters recognize the value. Because one of the top benefits of using certified compostable packaging is that a lot of times they come with leftover food in them. And that's what the microbes really love. If the food is in there, that's what they're going to go after. The container provides a carbon source so that they can balance their diet and be able to have enough energy to break all of those organic materials down. So most composters recognize the value of it. But as Erin mentioned earlier, we sometimes define certified compostable packaging, PLA mostly, as almost a gateway material. The number one way people decide where to put their trash is by looking in the bin. So if someone looks in a compost bin and there's a plastic cup in there, most people aren't as nerdy as Erin and I and pick up every container that comes in our hands and look at the bottom.
Yeah, we're the freaks who edit our trash.
Right? Yeah. And most people just don't want to take the time to be that mindful about it. So if we can work up chain in a utopian perfect world, we would either have durables or only certified compostables, so that there wouldn't be a choice. There wouldn't be contamination. Because once those non-compostables get to the composting facilities, that's when it becomes expensive, challenging, frustrating, and really is just easier to say no to everything than to try to manage that when it gets there.
No to everything is the kind of linear approach that we've always taken. It's a binary yes, no, but systems are much more complex than that. How do we, thinking about Colorado, for instance, there are clearly a lot of Colorado restaurants that would like to be able to say that they're using compostable materials and that it's being processed. Could we go to those companies and say, can you exert some leverage with the state to get a change? Is there anything particularly that consumers listening to the show could do too?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I also just want to make a note that A1 Organics is not the only composter in the state of Colorado. There are other ones there, and some of the smaller ones are still accepting compostable packaging. So connecting those dots and finding who's who in order to complete that circular economy is important. And that's a question customers can ask, right? There's a composting map available from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. Findacomposter.com identifies where those are. There are community composters that are in a lot of local communities that may take that. So the best thing to do is walk in and ask, are you using compostables? Where are they going at the end? Would you like me to advocate on your behalf to be able to help get these where they should go at the end?
So you're highlighting, one of the reasons that Earth911 exists is to help people make these determinations locally. And local reality is what defines not just compostability, but recyclability and circularity generally. A lot of national media publish these explainers about what can be recycled or composted without any of that local context, and it creates a lot of confusion. Can you, to the point about editing our trash a moment ago, help us look into our bin for a moment and think about easy choices that probably will be applicable in most places about what you can do with a compostable?
Yeah, for me, it goes one step before that.
Okay.
Let's look at what we're buying and what we're bringing
Great
home
point.
before we need to worry about managing it as waste at the end. So it's always step one: reduce, reuse, recycle. We've been chanting that since we were kids, and they're listed in that order for order of priority, in order of preference. So let's reduce first and make good choices when we're consuming. And then Erin can talk to us about editing our trash.
Well, I just want to speak to what we at World Centric, like how we design. I think you alluded to this a little earlier, Mitch, about the designing of compostables. And I really do think that by trying to clearly distinguish our product as compostable just by the materials we choose. For example, we do unbleached fiber, so it has that really earthy looking feel and touch. So I feel like people are a little more connected and maybe instinctually know that that's compostable. I would hope that at least people have make that connection specifically to fiber, of course, but that in my mind is a big distinguishing factor that the look and feel, and that making it distinguish is a huge part of what we try to do to make our product hopefully proper end of life discarding, which is the compost system.
Well, and you're making a critical point that the design itself has to convey the full life cycle of the product in some sense. And that earthy look, I know what you mean. I look at that and I go, okay, I know that's probably not bleached in the first place, which can pollute the compost and do worse things down the line. Do you see, as you think outward, say 10 years from now, an environment in which we will not have to make those decisions because either the infrastructure will be fully realized or the design of materials will convey that clear next step simply based on how they look and feel?
The composting industry is pretty young. We're still figuring it out as we go along. And I think that right now, composting is getting a lot of attention and conversation locally and nationally. And we're working on things and talking about things like labeling, right? For the benefit of the consumer, so they can make the right choice at the bin, but also for ease of the composter. When you're looking at 30 tons of organic material all mixed together and you're sitting in a loader, 7 feet up in the air, you can't necessarily see identity on a clear plastic cup. So working from that end, and now that we are getting attention for funding expansion of composting facilities, I'm feeling optimistic. 10 years down the road, we'll start to get there.
And your take-back program that you were talking about for the new PLA reusable is a great example of taking the complexity out for the consumer. But it does ultimately lie with each of us, it sounds like, to make these distinctions.
It does. I want to mention that there have been advancements like Washington and now California and Colorado and even Canada as a country have called out tinting or making the product more identifiable or distinguished by a color.
Right.
And so Washington State, for example, has gone to beige brown or green. Colorado is saying green now to really help the consumer and the composter alike to identify that product is compostable. So I think with the proper labeling identification scheme, and especially if it could be universal, like right. I think Canada is doing it right because they're trying to do it countrywide. We're doing it a little bit more patchwork and state by state, which is frankly confusing and can get really ugly and be inefficient. So I don't know why we can't just team together and make this more of a union of, across the country.
Oh, if only we could address that across all the issues that we are divided over.
Oh, absolutely. But this is a particular one having to do with our waste. So
and relatively easy in the sense that you're talking about. Although, of course, I can imagine green cups coming out from all sorts of organizations if there isn't a prohibition on using green.
And that's right. And to limit the greenwashing, I think that's the most important thing you need to have the scientific evidence behind it if you're going to make those claims and you're going to color your product that. Otherwise, they need to be heavily fined if they are not in compliance and contributing to this misinformation.
I think that's the next conversation we'll have, because you just said something that requires a lot of unpacking. Tell us how listeners can follow along with what World Centric is doing.
Great content on social these days. So follow us at World Centric. We're on all of it: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we have articles on our blog called Earth Matters at worldcentric.com. So we're writing a lot of opinion pieces about the industry and what's happening. But give us a follow. We'd love to get your comments, feedback, anything to help our industry move forward.
Well, Elly and Erin, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch.
We've been speaking with World Centric's resource recovery managers for the Eastern and Western United States, Elly Ventura and Erin Levine, respectively. You can learn more about World Centric and shop for compostable products at worldcentric.com. World Centric is all one word, no space, no dash, worldcentric.com. The coordination of the evolution of systems is the hard part of sustainability. Our complex economy is at the beginning of a transition, and progress is uneven. Different rules apply to different states' recycling and composting programs, while many companies make changes to their products, which requires consumers to understand even more and sort their recyclables and compostables based on the capabilities of their local recycling and composting systems. It would be great, as Erin and Elly said, if we had a national composting system that made it easy for us to act responsibly. To paraphrase the science fiction writer, William S. Gibson, the future of composting is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Look to California, Colorado, Vermont, and other states that are taking the lead for ideas that you can ask your local government and private companies to make available for you. In the meantime, take the time to pre-cycle. Choose products based on their recyclability, compostability, and reduced environmental impact. Then, when you're done with them, send them to the right place. The advent of improved labeling and use of color to indicate compostability is a promising development, but legislation or regulations also need to prohibit bad actors from making a green-colored cup that cannot be composted. National guidelines are needed to make consumer choices consistent. In Washington state, for example, compostables can be colored green, brown, or beige, and the law prohibits the use of those colors on products that cannot be composted. In 2022, the U.S. Senate passed the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, but it did not make it through the House. Ask your congressperson to take the lead by reintroducing the bill with new provisions about the use of color to communicate compostability. And of course, we're going to continue to track this story here on Sustainability in Your Ear. Hey, I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 390 other interviews we produced with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Please write a review on your favorite podcast platform to help your neighbors find us. You folks are the amplifiers that spread more ideas so we can create less waste. Tell your friends that you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness they may prefer. And thank you, folks. Thank you very much for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.